Good evening, everyone. There's more officers than councillors here at the moment. Thank you for all your attendance and all the officers. Shall we just have any apologies first? Councillor Alston?
Thank you, Chair. Gaurav Pandey is stuck in traffic and will be here as soon as he possibly can.
I think the same goes to Councillor Sandhu. He's on his way back from a funeral in Birmingham, so he should be here soon, joining us. Yeah. Okay, so apart from those, no.
Chair, as a previous member of the Cabinet, it's been suggested that I may need to declare individual items of interest. At the moment, I can't see anything on tonight's agenda that I've had direct control over other than Better Together, but that's been officer-led and there's no decisions that we've been made through the Cabinet in relation to that, from what I can understand.
Note that, thank you. Can I just ask everybody to speak up? I think the acoustics are probably not as good as they normally are, and yeah, just clear and stronger into the microphone, please. Right, okay, so no other declaration of interest. Minutes of the last meeting. I think there's one addition. I think under apologies for absence, there were apologies from Councillor Sandhu at the last meeting. So if you can change that. Any other comments or corrections from the minutes? Are we happy to accept them as a true record apart from those changes? Yep. Okay. And is there any matters rising from the? No. No. I think the only one which I think I'll just mention is we did say that we'd have a report on the Alistair Hall golf course, but that's been deferred to the January meeting on the basis that there are two processes going through at the moment, one through the Ombudsman and one with the with the central government about a complaint. So hopefully by deferring it to the January board meeting, we will have conclusions on those and we'll get a report at that point. Okay? Right, moving on then. The first of the agendas are item 5, Future Libraries Vision. Claire, do you want to introduce, or you want to introduce the person who's going to be speaking?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. The Derby Library's Future Ambition is a presentation that's been pulled together with colleagues in the library service, and we have Mark Elliott, the Senior Library Manager, here today in order to present the information that's been collated. We were due to have DHA here also, and apologies due to illness, they're not able to present their presentation this evening.
We've taken that appendix out.
Yes, yeah. I understand so. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Wasn't a painful operation, but that's been done.
Okay, thanks. Right. We were asked to do a brief presentation about our future ambition, and I've come here with my colleague Colette Levers, who's behind me in the second row, to expand upon that. Now, at the bottom of that slide is our strapline, which is everything begins with reading. Now, we recognise that this is quite a claim, but it's there to make a point. And that point is that reading and literacy are a gateway skill. That if you can read, then you can go on to do everything. So you can become a scientist, a mathematician, or whatever. So you have to get the literacy there first. And that means, as far as we're concerned, that libraries are as relevant now as they have always been, because Derby needs to look at the literacy of its children and make sure that they achieve the highest possible standards. If I could have the next slide. We thought it would be useful to start with a definition of what the statutory service is, and that's Derby Libraries. So it's 5 public library sites. We should explain that Riverside is the library downstairs in the council house. And just for a little bit of confusion, local studies is in Riverside Chambers, which is across the way. They're a tenant in that building. What we largely do is besides delivering those frontline services, is provide the infrastructure behind everything else. So we provide the e-books, the e-audio, the e-newspapers, the e-magazines, and we operate the library computer system, and the bit the public see is the catalogue, which lists everything we have, and obviously monitors what's going on with all of that stock and where it is and who has it and all that sort of thing. The other key process we do is the stock acquisition. So we buy all the stock for the statutory service, but also the CMLs. And we process that, and we then manage it when it's in the service, editing it and moving it around and so on. If I can have the next slide. Thank you. So having explained what we are, our future ambition falls under these headings: expand knowledge, stimulate creativity, connect people, and foster a sense of community. And that's what we're trying to achieve going forward. If we can have the next slide. Okay. Looking at expanding knowledge, our key focus is on literacy. This is particularly children's literacy going forward. The sort of thing we do, just in case you aren't aware, is book start. So every child in the city gets a book when they're born. We do rhyme times. Now, that sounds like fun, but basically, and it is, but the purpose of that is not to force children into reading too early, but to get them used to sort of rhymes and the rhythm of it, and actually helping not just them, but also their parents, really, because it actually is a big tool for isolated parents to come together. Often when people have children, they're often quite isolated. So those rhyme times are really powerful for 2 reasons: to help children learn to read, but also it brings lots of young parents together within the libraries. Besides that, we do Summer Reading Challenge. Children's reading dips off over the summer, and we've run that for many years. It's a national thing. We do a local initiative as well after that called the Big Family Read, where we encourage children to read, but also write. And we run competitions around that. And then there is now something nationally coming in for the winter months as well. So we do quite a lot of promotional activities to encourage children and their carers to actually get involved in literacy. We also do that for adults, but on a lesser scale. We run literacy classes, which are just restarting after COVID. So our ambition really is to rebuild those and attract back lots of the quite highly qualified volunteers that we used to have pre-COVID to come back post-COVID now and start those classes again. It's not just about reading, though. Another literacy that we deal with is digital literacy. And what we do here is encourage children to get more involved by running coding classes. These are programming classes. So obviously a stepping stone if they want to become a computer programmer. And these are very, very popular. And we get asked, what's next? And so that will come in another slide, but we're hoping to build on those. And for it tends to be older people, but not exclusively, we run taster sessions for the internet. So if somebody doesn't know how to use the internet and doesn't have the confidence to tackle shopping, banking, booking a holiday, that sort of thing, we run those sessions in libraries as well. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So building on those, we're trying to stimulate creativity. So I mentioned the coding. What we're doing at the moment is putting a bid into the Arts Council to for funding to buy equipment to enable us to do graphic art. So we're through to the second round, and we find out in February whether we've got that funding or not. This is primarily for young people, but we also want to try and engage with older people once we've built up their confidence to try and get involved in more graphics work. Back to the reading, what we're trying to do is, obviously these are difficult times, and what we'd like to do is run more events to engage children in reading and writing as well. And we're building partnerships, particularly with Derby Theatre, to actually run events, but also bid primarily to the Arts Council to actually gain funding to have more happenings in our library. And it's not just about our activities that can lead to creativity. We also support lots of other organisations in the city with their efforts to be creative. If you could click on that bottom link that says Fifth Word Theatre. Should magically jump to the internet. If you hold down Control and then hit Enter. Oh, right. Okay. Right. I don't know whether people can see that or not, but basically we worked with Derby Theatre and it was on an initiative to actually sort of showcase women who had achieved in the theatre in the East Midlands. And this was, the intention of this was to inspire other young people, mainly young women, to actually think, I could do that as well. So that was that initiative. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. Another heading we had was Connect People, and libraries are quite good at that because we strive not to become labelled, so we shouldn't be labelled by religion, belief, politics, or anything like that. We should be sort of neutral and a sort of trusted place. There are lots of activities within the library that people can get involved in, running the rhyme times, being a friend of the library, just generally being a general volunteer running activities. There are reading groups. There are lots of things going on that people can connect with. And I think post-COVID, I think we all realise what it's like to be isolated, during COVID. And post-COVID, the spaces are quite valuable and potentially quite useful to build community, a sense of community. If I could have the next slide, which is what this slide is about. And so I've mentioned the sort of things that go on. We actually target local poets. We run quite a few events for local poets. They're often small events because, this is not a mass gathering type activity, and it fits quite well into our libraries, and we support those. We are hoping to restart events at Normanton Library. We used to do those at Pear Tree for women. I mentioned the sort of thing like Knit and Natter as well, but I focused here on two activities that the local studies library do. I'm hoping that this is not going to work, is it? If you could click on Picture the Past. No? Okay. I don't know whether you can see. What would have happened is that would have leapt out to the web to a database. This database contains tens of thousands of, well, actually more than that, many images of Derby and Derbyshire. So we work in partnership with a range of organisations in Derbyshire. And it's got about 12,000 images of Derby. And our ambition is to build that and increase that content. So if you are able to see it, you'll see lots of historical pictures of Derby on there. And one of the things we were talking about today was putting images Oh,
If members go onto their own computer and click on it, you can see it.
good. Then we were talking about putting images of COVID on the database today, you know, the Derby's experience with COVID, and trying to put pictorial images that sum that up onto that database. And the other website you may or may not be able to see is a project with the British Library and the BBC. And what they're trying to do is create a sort of national archive of voice recordings. Now, lots of small little libraries and archives across the country have small archives which they can't look after. They don't have the resources, sometimes the expertise to actually keep these things going. And it's an effort to try and pull this together nationally. And Derby is one of the partners in that. And we're passing our material through to this national archive and having it processed. And hopefully that will preserve content about Derby, oral histories, where people talk about Derby and its history and what goes on there forever, hopefully, because that central hub does have the digital capacity to actually keep up with changing technology and preserve those items. Okay, next slide. Okay, they're all the things we're doing, and a lot of that is rebuilding, to be honest. There are significant events coming up which are all a little bit unknown and also may prove to be quite demanding of what is quite a small service, really. The one that stands out to me is the tender for the new library computer system, which might not sound exciting, but the whole service hangs off that computer system. And if we go out and have a new supplier, then practically all our processes change. Every staff member needs retraining. It's quite demanding. We do that in partnership with library authorities across the East Midlands. So it's a process we're a member of, but not in total control of. There's a possibility of us, only a possibility or discussion around us being part of Project Assemble, maybe. The Arts Council have an accreditation path for museums, and if they get through that accreditation route, they can apply for more funding, and they're allowed to bid to certain funds. And that doesn't exist in libraries at the moment, but there is a pilot going on looking at that and what if you don't go through the accreditation process, what that means for you. So we'll find out what that is in due course. And then there's the City of Culture, which we've been very successful with so far. And obviously that could be quite, all-consuming, couldn't it? And then last but not least, there is a potential review of community-managed libraries. So there are quite a lot. No clear timetables for, a lot of it, but, it is there. Okay, that's it.
Thank you for that. Any questions, comments? Councillor Alston?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of observations, really. You sort of mentioned DHA in terms of your thoughts, but what are you doing as the sort of central libraries in ensuring that we're all coherent, we're not disjointed, and that they're working together, and that the things that are available within our main libraries are also shared and passed through? And you mentioned the bid that you're working on at the moment, and you've just mentioned in the latter bit there that as a council we're restricted in the bids that we can potentially do, but what are we doing to utilise the fact that we've got DHA as our partner in this approach? And finally, the last sort of question I have is around having when we're looking at a review of the libraries and the things that we're looking at here, I would have liked to have seen the sort of attendance, the number usage, the number of book loans. I appreciate that's very different at the moment because of COVID, and that is you know, you wouldn't get a like for like in year on year, but it would have been interesting, or would be still interesting to, as we go forward, to look at how we're recovering across the whole of the libraries, not just the 5 city council managed ones, to look at the usage and making sure that we have still got the right libraries in the right locations for the relevant usage.
Okay, there was quite a lot there, so prompt me if I forget. The bid to the Arts Council, we did approach DHA to take part, and my expectation is that if we get the bid, that we will make an offer to them. So we didn't exclude them. The library system is set up to share. That's what it's about. So as soon as you start dividing it up, it falls down. Derby doesn't have a big library. It has a network of very small libraries. It has to share. It has to move things around. And that's what the computer system does. So if somebody puts a hold in at Spondon Library, there is no barrier to that stock being shifted from a statutory library to Spondon, which is a CML library, and vice versa. So there is a flow of stock. I know I've forgotten one already. The wider issue, I was asked for an ambition. Obviously, an ambition is to recover from COVID. I take that point. We are in the statutory library, and I was asked, I'm the statutory service, so I was here to present on that. DHA were here to present on DHA, so that wasn't in my remit. We do have figures, and they are recovering. Some sites quicker than others. I mean, Mickleover is booming. Riverside is getting quite busy again. The other sites are less so. But it's in a sense, it's my perception, that wasn't our ambition. That's more of a statement about business. You know, our ambition, yes, is to rebuild a lot of activity, but our ambition is, you know, to do the Arts Council bid and to do those sorts of things. So, you know, you're quite right, those things are very important, but it's my interpretation, I didn't think they fitted into that. But those figures like that can be supplied. Obviously, if you want them, then that's not a problem. What did I forget?
Just the bid, working together in the future on bids that aren't necessarily available for councils, that are available to partnership partners, if you like. But on the one around book sharing and working together, my question was really more around the offer that's on in the city, for example, your poets, that you have events for. Do you share that opportunity with the local libraries, as in with the other those that aren't?
No, for instance, there are so many other factors. So, for instance, we've tried moving the poets to another site, the Normanton. The person organising it, who is very well placed to, not part of the library service, who is very well placed to know what was going on in the city, admittedly ran it in the night when there was a poetry event happening at the university. However, the take-up was almost zero. So what happened is this person phoned around the people that normally come and asked why not. And the feedback was that the public didn't want to travel into Normanton at that time of night to that event. So what we get back from that community is they're only interested in Riverside Library, because the only reason they're interested in that library is because it's in the centre of town, and they're not interested in going somewhere else. I think it's a very small niche market, and they come from a wide area, and they want to be in the centre for transport, and they're not interested in traipsing out to somewhere else. So, it depends what it is, whether we offer it to organisations or not. And it would help our bids. Well, we've got to have partners in bids. You can't not have partners. So there's no wall to that. It's just horses for courses,
Any other questions from anybody else? The home library service, can you say a bit more about that? What does that actually mean?
Oh, sorry, I didn't pick up on it, did I? It's a small service, and not everybody wants a digital service. So as you can see from the list on that slide, we've got lots of digital now. But some people aren't willing to engage with digital, and to be honest, some people aren't in the right, are not healthy enough. They're not capable of actually engaging with digital. So we still have a service where if you are unable to get to a library and you don't have family members that can help you out, that we will take books out to you and then come and collect them. It's a small service, but for some people, you haven't got time, but some of the stories are quite moving in terms of it helps people who perhaps see one person a month, and that is their book delivery service. So that's what it is.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good thing. I just wondered what level of capacity we had to do that, because it can be quite resource intensive, and I don't know what the need is.
What it needs to do post, COVID again, is we need a whole raft of volunteers to help facilitate that. There are a limited number of staff hours to do it, but we also deliver to care homes, some care homes. Again, that's gone wrong with COVID, and that obviously hits more people in one delivery, if you know what I mean. So that's what the home library service is.
Is that adult residential care homes, or is it children's care homes?
No, it's the adult ones for older people.
Okay. You mentioned a couple of times volunteers and getting them back up to speed post-COVID. What are the challenges, and what do you think your timeline is to sort of get back to, if we can get back to where we were before COVID?
It depends on the activity, and it depends on the site. So initially, for instance, with the adult literacy classes, they're very one-to-one. They're very small groups, and you're very close. Now, we've got the perspex up. People have got masks on. A lot of the tutors, the volunteers in those groups are older people. There's some very high-powered, retired people in there, people with massive lists of qualifications and expertise, and they are very difficult to replace, so we kind of need to retain them. But they were saying, oh, no, I'm not coming back into this environment. I'm in my 70s and I'm not going to risk that. They are now back, largely. So it took longer with that group. Other groups, Colette will reinforce this, I'm sure, with the children's activities. If you want somebody to stand up and project in front of 40 adults and their offspring, they're more anxious, quite rightly, about that. So there are higher levels of risks there. So it depends on the activity and also the location, I feel. Certain areas are more relaxed about it than others, I sense. And so I think a lot of people are trying to go back to normal. And if anything, I would say colleagues in the library service are pressurising me to actually revisit our risk assessments and actually loosen things up a bit more, because the public are pushing us that way. So I think we will get back to normal fairly quickly, is my sense.
I think it'd be interesting on the basis that the library service is quite dependent on volunteers, not just the volunteers that you mentioned in terms of encouraging community involvement, but also in terms of the CML libraries. So would it be helpful to bring something back in the future just to see how you're progressing on just engagement and volunteers and getting back to normal?
I believe that the intention is for DHA to come and do another presentation.
I think, Claire, what I'm looking to see is that can we get an update as we go back to normal, how we're progressing on use of libraries and use of volunteers and them just getting back to normal.
Absolutely, Chair, no problem at all. Thank you.
Okay. Are we okay with that? Would you agree with that, board members? Yeah? Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. Just to mention, you mentioned about the home libraries that are available. And I know that we've had a fantastic response during COVID from our Good Neighbour programme and the number of volunteers that we had. I just wonder if there's an opportunity to work again with Community Action and the Good Neighbour programme there to look at recruiting volunteers for that specific service and seeing if there is more that we can do. I think you mentioned the fact that many of the volunteers are older, and I'm sure there's a number of people that would usually utilise the library that aren't feeling confident yet to do so. And I think if we have got the volunteers available, I know that you know, obviously during COVID there were more volunteers who had more free time, but I think it's about making that facility fit in with those residents if we can. So I just wonder if there's an opportunity there.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, thank you for your report. Moving on then to the next agenda item, which is the update on Pear Tree Library update. Steve, you want to introduce yourself and give us an update? Just verbal,
Thank you, Chair. So, good evening. My name is Stephen Kaplan, Director of Property Services. So, thank you for...
Move the microphone closer to you.
Oh, there we go. Is that better? Feedback. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So, yes, you and the board invited me this evening to give a brief update as best I can on the situation with regard to the former Pear Tree Library, which we've just heard. Obviously, the particular service is now relocated, and it's to do with the asset itself.
Steve, just before you start, I think there are many officers here, probably more officers than council members, who know the background to why the question is here. Because I think nearly every officer who's dealing with this is new and probably don't know the history. There was concern raised, particularly by local councillors in the Normanton area where Pear Tree Library is, and I have to declare an interest. I'm one of those members, that the council's decision to sell off Pear Tree Library, the Carnegie Anthropological donated library, was of a concern because it's a long-standing community facility in the heart of Normanton and in the inner city. And the officers at the time gave the reason for selling it was that the cost of repair for a Grade 2 listed building, particularly the roof, was too much for the council to bear, and something like £1.5 million was indicated as the cost, and that was too much, and alternatives were looked at, and decision made to dispose of the site. It was objected strongly by many local members, but wider than that, and it was questioned at the time whether the cost, the reason given for the cost being so high, that it probably wasn't that high. So the interest, now it has been sold, is more about what are the implications, how did, and it's back, it's running, it's a sort of a fully functioning, running business with lots of attractive, and you'll show probably some photographs in a bit about what they'd be done. The question is, did it cost that much money to get it up and running? Because that's a key interest for many in terms of scrutinising decisions by the council. So that's the context and the background.
Sorry, Steve, just before you come back to that, as we discussed before the meeting, Councillor,
Yeah.
it may be better off referring this to the Corporate
I'm
Services
sure the officer will
Scrutiny
say that,
Board.
and we'll do
All
that,
right,
yeah.
thank
so
you.
That's the background, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John. Yes, I have been trying to research the history as best as possible and engage with a number of colleagues, and you're absolutely right. Most of, if not all of the senior leadership team themselves were not around when the decision was made in November 2018, when the Council Cabinet approved the disposal, which eventually led to the sale by way of a lease. So the freehold hasn't transferred as of today. It's worth making that point. To 2i Investments Limited, which were the successful party after an expression of interest process where there were 13 parties. Now, in that report that went to Cabinet, as you rightly said, I believe there was suggestions made that the cost of the repairs to the property were between £1 and £1.5 million. I believe that was correct on the estimate provided to the Cabinet at the time. Can I just pick up on a particular point, Chair? You said the property was Grade 2 listed. I've checked, it isn't Grade 2 listed. It's locally listed. And there is a subtle difference, because if it was Grade 2 listed, then we would have been able to get far more actual detail of the precise work that 2i Investments Limited carried out, because they would need listed building consent, which means our heritage officers would have access to all that information. But because it's only locally listed, they don't have to provide that information. Therefore, in answer to your question, what have they spent, it's very difficult for us to know, because that's their information. I have spoke to colleagues and officers that have been to the property and checked that they're complying with the contract whereby they undertook certain work, and their estimates are they probably spent at least £500,000 on it, which is why they're not able to complete the purchase currently, but they have until June the year after next, June 2023, in which to complete the purchase by way of a further additional £160,000. If they fail to do that, then I believe the lease lapses and we get the property back. In terms of the use as a community asset, then as you've rightly pointed out, the ground floor is a sort of mini shopping stroke retail environment, and the first floor, I believe, is being refurbished and is available to hire to any community or interested party that wishes to do so. In just coming back to that cost estimate, I believe the council's technical services, they arranged inspections at the time, and in order to carry out the repairs, which the council would have done to a specification whereby the council usually requires sort of minimum 30 to 50 years lifespan, that is the level of work that they envisaged at the time. Whether the purchaser has that amount of longevity in their specification, we don't know, but we do know they have carried out the work that they were contractually obliged to do so. So if there are particular scrutiny questions of the detail that went to Cabinet, then that will probably be, as Don was just said, down to Corporate Services.
Thank you, Steve, for the update. Councillor Alston?
Chair, can we just seek clarification from officers? Because obviously this decision was made in 2018. I will declare an interest. I will believe I was on the Cabinet at that point. Is it right that retrospectively we look at this, Steve, or is it something that is there is limited time? And I just don't want to waste officer time on that front.
Councillor Alston, what is the question?
In terms of you're asking officers to look back at the decision that was made and the details around a decision that was made 3 years ago.
That is not what I said.
Apologies.
A decision was made. We can't undo the decision.
Right.
It's the consequence of the decision. The decision was to sell off Pear Tree Library on the basis of the cost of maintaining it to the level that Steve has just mentioned would be something like a minimum, that was just for the roof as well, that was nothing else but for the roof repairs, was £1 to £1.5 million. And that was the reason given by Cabinet that we cannot do that work, and therefore we'll dispose of the building and look out for alternative sites for a local library. That was a decision. It was challenged at the time that would it cost so much to get the work done, and can we not save this community facility for what it was used for, which is a library. May I add, a long-standing library where somebody like me, when we grew up, you relied on that library to learn and supplement our education. So the question was, that was a decision made. We can't undo the decision, but the question is, was that correct? Because there was a challenge then at the time that that was too large amount of money being said. So I think, Steve, what you just said is that you've been informed by the I don't know if you confirmed that, or you've just been informed by the current leaseholder that they've spent up to about £500,000 to do what?
Well, they haven't told us what they have spent. My colleagues that have inspected it estimate that they've committed at least £500,000 to the repairs of the roof and the refurbishment. That's what they will have assessed. But we don't have their information. We're not privy to that detail, unfortunately.
So I mean, I think that to me says up to £500,000 for refurbishment and repair, but they to buy the lease or buy the freehold, is it?
So, sorry, Chair. The deal I understand is they paid, I think, £45,000 as a deposit to enter the lease, and then they had to carry out the certain contracted works, which we believe they've done, and then they have a time period up to June 2023 to pay a further payment of £160,000, whereupon the freehold transfers.
So based on that, if my maths is any good, £500,000 plus 160, is it? 100
plus the deposit, so 200. So they will have committed, we believe, at least 750,000 by the time they've probably paid fees.
700 to 750,000 pounds, they will have the property and all the refurbishment will be done. That's to me sounds a lot less than the 1.5 million which was indicated by the council for just roof repairs at the time, actually.
Well, I don't know, obviously, what was specified. We suspect that the work level that they will be carrying out might not be a 30-year repair. Often the private sector doesn't specify such a rigorous repair regime. So it's difficult to tell, but that is what we would have estimated had the council spent on it. And they were the highest bidder out of 13 EOIs, I understand.
Okay, Councillor Ralston.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important, I think that picking up on the point there that as a council, it often is more onerous as a council for any of those types of works, the procurement process, the costs, the implications that it has. As an independent provider, if you like, or an independent owner, you're not as restricted in terms of how those works are carried out, who has to do the works, etc. So often it is more financially viable for a non-council person to do it. I think that for me the question around this is, has the new library been successful? Has the usage of the new library that's been transferred, where it's moved to, been successful? And has the impact on the building had a positive impact on the area itself? That would be the two sort of questions I'd be looking at whilst looking at scrutinising this process, if you like.
Okay, that's always worth finding out about. But I am quite interested in this because, as I say, at the time, other councillors are here who were sort of not very happy with the decision made. So I think we can certainly get that, but I think that doesn't go away from the fact that we lost a facility which was quite central, quite historic, quite valued by local communities, and I'm surprised that at this moment, the cost of whatever reasons, Steve, in terms of 50 years or 30 years or whatever, the cost of somebody coming in and using that facility is a lot less than that we were told at the time. Councillor Atwell.
Thank you, Chair. I was one of those who strongly objected against the library going, because for many of us who've grown up in Normanton and other places attached to Normanton, whether it be Abbey or Breeton, used that over the years, and it wasn't just a library; it was a massive hub. I mean, as you know, Chair, I've got a business at Crossroads, so I see people going there daily, on a daily basis, from young kids to middle-aged parents, grandparents. It wasn't just a library; it was a community centre. It was a community hub for all walks and all races that met up there on a daily basis, whether it was reading the paper or reading books. It was a successful venue. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. And I think the concerning thing for me, Chair, is what you've just reiterated, is it was a costing of £1 to £1.5 million, and I see that place on a regular. And I don't think there's been that much spent on that to get it back up and running. And it's just a shame we couldn't have kept it and carried it on. I understand where C is coming from 30 years or 50 years. I mean, I build properties, as you know, for a living. You know, it's not hard to ascertain if it's going to be a 20, 30-year programme or a 30-year programme. The bottom line is we've lost a fantastic building that served the community for hundreds of years, if I'm correct, because that's been there a lot longer than we have, or was there for a lot longer than we have. And it's just a shame that we're having this conversation, but I think at the time, I think the costing was way overpriced to what it's actually cost to get about that. And that, for me, is quite concerning. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, as I said, it was a strong. Sorry.
Going to make the point about understand, obviously, members' interest in looking back at that decision that was taken, but clearly the Community Scrutiny Board is about looking at scrutinising things moving forward. We can't go back in time and change decisions that have been taken historically. Really positive about getting some information on the success of the library where it moved to, and also the impact of that regeneration in the vicinity of that neighbourhood. We provide that information in writing to members outside of this meeting. We can do that in the next few days, as questions been asked. But I'm not sure the mileage in continuing this scrutiny of this decision, because clearly it is historic, and this board is really about moving forward and scrutinising that the council are going to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for that. For you, it may be historic and it may not be very important, but I think to people in the local community, that decision was a decision which was challenged and strongly opposed by all the councillors in the area, but wider in the council as a whole. So yes, you know, historic. You may call it historic, but it is a very historic, bad decision which was challenged and always questioned about the amount of money that is going to cost to get it back up running, and that facility being used as a library, a local library with lots of connections to the local community, as Councillor Atwell said. So, you know, yes, I understand, you know, and not going back to it, scrutiny is about challenge and decisions. Whether we can go back and change things is a different matter, but holding to account and challenging decisions and finding information is part of the job of scrutiny, in my opinion. Councillor Atwell.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the point Rachel made, I totally get where you're coming from regarding the fact that it's no longer in use. But the bottom line is, I think what we need to be mindful of is when we're scrutinising projects in the near future, we need to get the costings right, because there's a difference about having a facility and not having a facility. That's where we need to be. We've lost this one. There's nothing we can do about it. But it's how we move on from here for future organisations where we can keep them or retain them, or whether we have just let them go because somebody somewhere has said it's going to cost an X amount, but in reality, it's not that cost that amount. Thank you, Chair.
I think you're right, but I think we can have our view on a decision which was challenged and seen to be wrong at the time, and I think the information, I know it's only assessments by officers, Steve, you know, it's not, we don't know the actual costs of what's happened, but I'm sure ours will be more thorough than what we actually spent, but, you know, we're probably looking at the top box, it still is a significantly lower than what we were led to believe would be needed to cost it, albeit you're clarifying that assessments were made over 50 years rather than over 30 years or 20 years or whatever it was. But it was certainly something that was worth saving, and it's a total disappointment that we lost such an important historic and very important local community facility. Councillor Alston.
Thank you, Chair. I just think it's important to say the facility hasn't been lost, it's been moved. The library is still available.
Yes, I think you've made that point twice now. Yeah, I agree.
No, sorry, if I can finish, Chair, please.
The library as a function has been moved to
Right.
St Augustine Community Centre, but the building and the historic connections with the local communities and an asset has been lost. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Right.
So thank you for your clarification.
Yes, so just to confirm, as I was saying, obviously the library facility is still available to use for residents, and I think as a scrutiny committee, I'd like to make a recommendation that we do prioritise looking, or we look at the usage of that library in comparison in terms of book lending, etc., so that we know that the facility that it's there for is being utilised and is effective for what the community needs.
I think I said that before. I agree with that, but that doesn't go away from the point that I've just made. You know, it's not a conflict between the two. We can do that.
Absolutely,
definitely.
but the building hasn't been lost. It is still there in the community.
The
Maybe
library
having
is there.
a different facility within
I think
it.
we're making two different points here. The library facility is there at St Augustine Community Centre on Almond Street. I've been there. It's in my patch. It's being used, but we lost a building and a facility which was well known and well used and of historic importance for the local community. We lost an asset in a building asset in Normanton, in the inner city area, where we're losing, frankly, we're losing a lot of assets. The Madeley Centre has been sold off. You know, there are buildings which could be used for community activity to regenerate and connect different communities. We're losing those in the inner city area. We can't afford to continue to do that.
No, sorry, I haven't got. I did circulate to you, but I'm happy for the board to see them, and I can make sure that Dom gets them for circulation.
I said to Steve the other day, this moved on a lot more than the internal photographs that he was able to send us. It's a fully functioning commercial enterprise. Thank you very much for your update.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. So really pleased to come along to Community Scrutiny to talk about this. I have attended a corporate scrutiny board to talk about this vision and this way of operating across the council very differently. So really welcome us to come to this board as well about some of the thinking behind this. So next slide, please, Tom. So what Better Together is a way of us transforming the way the organisation works, particularly learning from the benefits and the success of how we worked around COVID, where we work much more holistically across the organisation and its services, but also working alongside our partners in our city. A real sense of a step change in the level of partnership working that we are doing as an organisation working in this city. So it's not a project just based in one service. This is about how we rethink the role of the council in its working in the city on a whole range of different areas. And I'll come on to the various strands that feed into it, but it is about a transformational way of operating as an organisation. And just to give context to that, so on the next slide, there's a real sense of understanding the complexity of the problems that we face in our city and in every other city in this country. Really complex, wicked, difficult issues that are really hard to fix by one service or one organisation acting alone. So on that slide, you can see a number of those things like social isolation and loneliness, the impact of that, particularly around older people, feeding through into physical illness, the impact in our demand services and adult social care caused by that, a massive issue, much bigger than one organisation can fix. The issues around climate change that are affecting our weather across the country, extreme flooding events, other things, real difficulty about how we respond to those things. Homelessness and rough sleeping, real problems about how we support the most vulnerable residents of our community with some of the most traumatic and difficult life experiences. How do you help them to move on, off the streets but actually into purposeful living? Don't want to reinforce COVID. Everyone's been through COVID and what the impact of that was across our city and our society, and other things around changes in the high street and changes around the economy, more robotics, digital things being done in our businesses, taking away jobs from the front line. So these are the things that we face in this city and every city in this country that are really difficult, complex challenges. And how can we, as the council for Derby, so we are their council, be the most effective we can be in addressing some of these challenges. So that's really the purpose behind Better Together, is how do we really be most fit for purpose to deal with this sort of stuff. So next slide, please, Dom. And just to be clear, the context in which we work is really complicated. And I've used this slide a lot in a lot of different places. And every one of those bits of spaghetti is another organisation. If you think about the organisations that impact on whether that's climate change or loneliness, you're talking about the health service, you're talking about the environment agency, you're talking about, the health service is not just one thing, but 5 or 6 different trusts that play a part in supporting health and outcomes for our community. The range of organisations, from the police, from the voluntary community sector, there are so many different pieces of spaghetti in what is our public service. It's really complicated. And that's the context that we're trying to fix these really difficult, complex solutions with. So there's a real attempt to how can we make that better? How can we weave together threads of that spaghetti into bits that actually work more effectively by working in an aligned way on a joint vision? Next slide, please, Dom. And this is the reality, whether we like it or we don't, not just in local government, but in public services generally. For the last 10 years, this has been our reality. You're having to do more with less, and having to find ways of being more innovative and be able to meet some of those challenges around our overall budgets reducing. And that has been an extremely difficult, challenging period. Now, we're hopeful in the announcement, hoping before Christmas and some of in the budget, there's going to be perhaps a change to that message from all public services, some more funding going into them. But it is a real reality. We can't always get more money. We have to do things differently, and that is part of this context. Next slide, please, Dom. So what we're talking about here is a system change and a real sense of building on the success that the council had in COVID, working very differently with our partners. We had so many examples where we worked with the voluntary and community sector, with our local businesses, where we worked with our cultural partners at co-producing our cultural events. We've worked with people in a different way, and we've shared responsibility for particular projects with partners in ways that I think perhaps hark back to when we were perhaps over 10 years ago, where the council was, I think, much more effective at working with partners and did much more of that sort of partnership work. So going back to some of those real strong foundations of working together and making that a requirement of how we work going forward. So absolutely around collaborating, working across the organisation, recognising that loneliness is a problem that the library service are as effective as dealing with as adult social care are, as actually are the GPs and actually often are the local police officers. So a real sense of working across, really informed by individuals and so the aspiration and that need. What's the outcome we're trying to achieve here? People not being lonely, not what a service might want to do. So really recognising that broader perspective. Based on the assets, I think, I've said this to other places and other contexts, this city is full of the most incredible people in our community, in our businesses, in our cultural organisations. There are great, innovative, imaginative, compelling, innovative people doing incredible things. How can we create an environment to allow more of that to happen and more of that to flourish? And there are examples everywhere. The work we did on the Muslim Burial Committee, the work of one Community One in Pakistan Community Centre, the wrestling club in other part of our city in Chaddeston, the work around baby people, around hip hop. There's so much stuff going on in our city. How can we actually unlock that, allow more of that to happen? Take an asset-based approach, not a deficit one where we say that places are got problems and deprivation and issues, but actually how do we unlock some of those assets that exist in those places? And fundamentally, if you move to the next slide, please, Dom, it's about building resilience. I would argue, and I've argued this at a national level within the sector, the role of councils, local government in that complicated system is to build resilience, is to help our people, our communities, our individuals to be as resilient as they can possibly be, because it can't be that the state, the council can fix everything, because we can't fix everything, but we can be a much more powerful player in helping people fix things for themselves and fixing things as an individual or from a neighbourhood point of view. So that is really the intention of this programme, is to create a culture of collaboration where we work with everybody and we get the best energy and ideas from everyone to really help our city be the best that it can be. Thanks, Dom. So the programme is about changing how we work as a council. So it does include a strand around how we work in locality, we'll come on to that, but it's more than that. It's about a different way of the council thinking about its job and working alongside its city. So what it means for our workforce and how they think differently, so they work alongside rather than trying to do things to people or do things for people, working with people, and the culture we need to do that, how we create the platforms for those players in our city to play on effectively and be able to achieve that resilience and great outcomes, and the whole thing, how we connect people. So also the work that we do is connecting a cultural organisation to a business, to a local voluntary organisation, to a community. That connection piece is really critical. Thanks, Dom. So we're very much shifting the focus. I'm sure members have looked at some of these slides and have seen some of the key things on here. It's how do we work much more effectively to bring information that is helpful to local members, using the intelligence members have in communities to be much more effective at bringing all the parts together in those localities and in those neighbourhoods to try and find solutions. So it's very much about how we do things as a collective and in that collaborative space, shifting our focus where we might have been previously looking at services. And I often describe this in the locality space. The organisation is set up in services and functions, and actually we have a neighbourhood team over here trying to sort out all those things to tie all those bits of services together. That's really the wrong approach. What we need to do is get the whole organisation to recognise it's working around delivering outcomes in locality and more broadly. That's really the challenge of this way of working, is shifting that whole focus of the organisation into understanding how it works alongside its people. Next slide, please, Dom. So it's very much about embracing innovation, creating a culture. We've done that in the pandemic. We worked really, really quickly. We did things that were quite, in a council context, perhaps you could argue, we're taking more risks by being innovative, by sharing responsibility. I would argue we've done things better by doing that, by letting our Muslim community and the burial community do some of the work around the funerals we need to do for that community, much more effective than us trying to manage that as a council, working alongside, sharing some of that. The Food for Thought Alliance, which allowed us to work with an organisation to distribute food across the whole city, similar with other programmes we've done since then. So it's really about delivering outcomes and being that really important player, partner in our city, but not trying to be in charge of it. That's the vision overall. Next slide, please, Dom. And it is, as I've said at the beginning, how we fix some of these really complicated problems, because these things are not things you can solve simply with one service or another service or one organisation or another organisation. It needs to be truly collaborative if we're truly going to move people from some of these difficult places out into purposeful lives where they can be resilient for themselves. And that's really the intention. Next slide, please, Dom. So it is about bringing together services that support our community. And one of the clear things in the work we've done so far is to recognise that we have a number of officers in different services who are working in locality or working in neighbourhoods. But they tend to work on their own service perspective and their own outcomes. And the opportunity to join up with other services working in those localities to collectively find ways to solve problems, have innovative ideas, work more collectively, is poor. So part of this is to really change that narrative that we expect officers who are working in a locality to work together, to share issues, to share information, to find solutions collectively, releasing them, if you like, from having just a service function where they can't see broader than that. So a real chance for them to be quite innovative and imaginative, and to really support our councillors. Local councillors in community are essential. The information and the intelligence that local members have of their places, their wards and neighbourhoods is absolutely critical information that we do not at the moment in the council use effectively enough. There's a real sense that we want to really maximise the opportunity of that information feeding into that joint officer team who can try and solve some of those problems in a different way. So it's a very, very different way of operating than we have in recent years, possibly not forever, but more recently. And part of that, bringing in our partners. So we're talking to the Safer Neighbourhoods team, the local GP surgery, other partners who want to be part of this journey. They want to be part of those conversations with our officers and with our councillors to try and solve problems in a much more collaborative way. And there's a real sense across the sector and across the country, actually in public services, this is how we need to work. So it is very much about all of those things I've just talked about, engaging, helping communities help themselves and do things in ways that are much, much more long-lasting and resilient. Next slide, please, Dom. For the member side of this, it's absolutely about improving our relationships. I get lots of emails in my own inbox for things that just do not get sorted out between services, and that causes tremendous frustration for councillors and a real sense of progress not being made effectively. So we intend to use this to really improve our relationships internally, but also to support what our members get around that answer and that answer and solutions to problem particularly. So a real shift in that relationship. I would like to see the local intelligence from local wards being driven into these meetings, into our cabinet meetings, into our papers about particular priorities, that it actually is in the central hub of the council's thinking. At the moment it isn't, it's sort of almost secondary, the neighbourhood piece of what we do, rather than it being central. And that's really, really important. It's a more planned approach to how we support projects in local communities that are collaborative, so able to work with our corporate partners in finding their resources and programming in properly, and just improving our reputation with working with our citizens more effectively. So less complaints and doing things actually will meet some of those big challenges more effectively. So overall, making a real difference. So Dom, next slide. So the thinking is very much about outcome-based. I've talked most of those things on there. Have a look at those in your own time. But this is about reimagining how we do working in neighbourhoods, making it much more central to the organisation, re-looking at how the neighbourhood boards work to make more effective use of that local member intelligence, enabling more local problem solving, working alongside our voluntary and community organisations, our local businesses, our GP, our practices, our other partners in the locality to be much more effective at finding solutions to those wicked problems. So rather than just sticking plasters, actually long-term solutions. Next slide, please, Dom. Just really important, this is work that is in progress. It's taken from the work we did in COVID and sort of, making it into a mainstream way of operating. The number of strands in it. One of those is culture. We need to change the culture of our officers, but how we work collectively. At the moment, we very much work in services, and we very much work in ways that either do things to or do things for people. We want to really give our officers the skills to work alongside people, to share power, to enable to do things for themselves, to find solutions in much more proactive ways and longer term ways. That we are much more effective at actually managing our leadership at place level. So we are seeing our policies that come forward for the council are seen in place context, not just in a service one. And really building on the great work we've done around our community engagement with the alliances through Community Action Derby over the last year and a half. Also important, understanding some of the experience, the lived experience of our citizens. Some of the work we've done around a single point of single view of a vulnerable customer. We've put all of our data sets together. So information that we get through Derby Direct, through our welfare team, through our adult social care team, our children's services team, into one picture so we can see the level of support some individuals are asking for. And we've seen individuals who are getting 14, 15 food parcels over a period of a year, whereas actually no one's going in there and saying, what is it that we need to do to help you to get out of that situation where you need food parcels to maintain, adequate supply of food for your family? What is it you really need? Working alongside you. particular example of that example, that work was then done, that individual hadn't got a cooker. So we worked out with a charity, a local charity, to get a cooker for that person. That changed their ability to be more resilient. So a real sense of understanding our data more effectively than we do at the moment, and scoping that in a strengths-based way. So we are looking at how we redesign our systems to do that, bringing our data together. And then our debate previously about Pear Tree Library and the libraries itself, how do we look at our assets in place? Because absolutely, as I think Mark said, and I think also has been said by members, community spaces in locality are absolutely critical, because they are the places where citizens can thrive and flourish, where they can come together, socially interact, find out information, access information or support, go on to get digital skills, meet other people, have the whole things Mark talked about, knit and natter groups, the coding design, young people, all that space to do those things builds resilience. So how can we rationalise our assets in a way that maximises the opportunity to do those things in those places, and do those things in those places, one place rather than multiple buildings for different things, for young families or for adults, or for do these things collectively as community. So rationalise some of that and do that more effectively. And we want to look at how we commission some of our services through the voluntary community sector. We're not doing that as well as we could. We could get much more by commissioning outcomes through the voluntary sector. We don't need to do things ourselves as a council. We can do things through our wonderful voluntary organisations. We don't need to do it ourselves. We can actually work alongside unlocking them to do some of that. And a real understanding that issue around our partnerships. I've mentioned on that slide, but very briefly, the integrated care systems, the health services are going down this route. They want to be part of this, so we can make sure that we commission collectively with our health colleagues on some of those outcomes. Next slide, please, Dom. So what we're doing around making this real is this is a transformation programme for the council. We have a cross-party member working group in place, and Councillor Dinser is on that and that group. It's overseeing this, because this is about real fundamental change to how the council operates rather than just a service change. We are going to be creating a strategic outcome board. So we're doing some work around changing our project management inside the council to create portfolios of projects, and there will be an outcome board for this. This is resilience. How can we help our people be resilient in our community? So a real outcome board to manage all the things that play a part of that, and that goes from our move more work in parks to our work in libraries to our social care and children's services teams together. We are reshaping our locality resources alongside this to make sure we've got the best possible teams that can support this transformation. So we've done some really interesting work which shows you the amount of officers who are going into localities but working separately, and how can we rationalise that to get a much more joined up resource that can work effectively alongside communities around solving problems. So we're reshaping that at the moment. That's being done by the outcome board, but Derby Homes are overseeing that, but it's very much working alongside our teams here, how we can put housing officers, neighbourhood officers together to get better use out of that additional resource, but reshaping those teams. We're also intend to do a big member workshop for all members across the council early next year to really sort of explain the thinking behind the transformation that this is. Because this is more than just about locality working being different. This is about us reshaping how the council works with partners, with its community, actually, but also in places. And we intend to have continuing conversations. As I said, I've been to the Corporate Scrutiny's Board about this transformation, and coming back to these other scrutiny boards and working with a cross-member working group to try and shape this as we go along. This needs to be a different way the council operates into the long term, learning from COVID, and it needs to be informed by members, their experience, officers across different services, and our partners as well. It's been to the Partnership Board, which is our overarching partnership board for the city, and again, a lot of support from partners about how they see this change being really powerful. I'll stop talking now, and I apologise for going on too long. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? Councillor Sandhu, Councillor Jennings after that.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, all the councillors try lots of different ways to connect with the communities. What will be the new with this your approach?
I think I answered that. I mean, the idea is to build on what we already have. So whatever works now and works well, we want to do more of that. and to look at any other opportunities that there might be to engage more broadly. So there is no one size fits all, there is no sort of structural blueprint for this. It's about working alongside the local members in those localities about how we can reach the most people and the most partners to get the right outcomes. So happy to have that been shaped by the working group, etc.
So
I've got another question as well. What's wrong with the neighborhood that you want to rejoin them?
The neighbourhood team, do you mean? Yeah. So the neighbourhood team at the moment are doing a fantastic job in the very difficult circumstances. I think I've said while I was talking that the organisation is organised in services and functions, and we have a neighbourhood team here who try and tie those different services together to try and solve problems. And it's really difficult and really frustrating. What we're trying to do here is to transform the organisation to understand the value of neighbourhoods, to make that easier. So what we're doing in very practical terms is taking the neighbourhood resource, our housing officer resource, and creating a combined team which is bigger and stronger than we've got already around neighbourhoods. So adding capacity into our support around locality. That's the simple answer. And the answer, and the more general answer, is how do we create a sense of the organisation as a whole, really valuing, understanding the differences in neighbourhoods and be able to respond to those very unique situations in different ways, more effectively. So we are adding capacity, if you like, to the neighbourhood team to give them more strength, more ability to get things done and more ability to solve problems. And the intention is for us to put other officers around the side of that core team into those spaces. So that's about our parks team, our highways team, libraries, adult social care, children's services, all of those to work alongside neighbourhoods to be part of their resource. So really, I think hopefully a game changer in really enhancing the capacity and the strength of our neighbourhood teams to be able to do the job that we're asking them to do. Does that answer the question?
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just say to Rachel, really, thank you for that report. It's a breath of fresh air. I have been out of local politics for quite a while now, but I remember us being advocates for change like this 10 years ago. So for me, it's a good move forward.
Councillor Alston.
Thank you, Chair. I'd obviously echo that. I think just to highlight the potential of what can happen here, I've been fortunate enough to have a fantastic community team, base team, if you like, and what we've done as a group of individuals is set up a quarterly network meeting, as we call it. And what we do as councillors is invite, and neighbourhood officers invite everybody to basically get round the table. So we have a quarterly meeting where our local area coordinators come, our neighbourhood officers come, our Derby Homes come. We've got people representing schools, the Traders Association, the Friends of Parks group, Friends of Cemetery groups, and more recently this last week we had individuals that came looking at mental health, had the fire service. What we do in that time is just have the ability to get together, have a quick round table of an update from individuals, and then we have that networking time to be able to share what we're doing and working together and creating that partnership approach. And it's worked fantastically in Spondon. And I think if we can emulate some of that working together, and obviously we always get a treat from across in our local traders. So we had fish and chips last Thursday, and the quarter before we had cakes from our local patter cake supplier in Spondon. So again, it's again supporting businesses, and I think it really does create that sense of community, and it would be great if we can emulate that sort of networking approach and partnership approach across the entire city.
Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reinforce, I should have probably said this before, our neighbourhood boards and our neighbourhood officers at the moment are very inconsistent. We've got some great examples. Spondon's one, Sinfin is the other, really, really powerful networks, really working on problem solving. But that is not the picture across all of our neighbourhood boards. And so this is about trying to raise them all to the same sort of level.
I mean, I can certainly say our neighbourhood board in Normanton, we do a lot of partnership working. I think nobody can argue against partnership working and better together. I think, Rachel, you mentioned there's a cross-party member working group in place, and the conversation's going on, and it needs to be reshaped, and there's going to be a program in 2022 where you're looking at more workshops. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is, and I think you said it early on in your presentation, all of this will obviously make a lot of difference, because wherever you work together, share ideas, get people around the table with fish and chips or whatever, it always makes a difference. But I've said this to you before, and I certainly have raised it in the working group as well. That will only go so far, because you did mention that over the last 10 odd years there's been budget cuts which has challenged all of us, councillors and officers, and that will have an impact, because when you start doing that and moving, I think what you're presenting here is further than what we can do as neighbourhood boards or local partnership working that Harvey mentioned. You're looking at a much bigger impact and reach, and starting with our own departments. I think the cultural element you mentioned in your presentation. How well do our different departments work together? Well, you've said it in here, we know it, they don't. You know, when neighbourhood managers and neighbourhood officers doing all that work, and then they say, let's get something done, different departments stand behind their silos. And if you can do something about breaking that bit of the culture, the silos, then we'll go a long way. But I think it'll still come back to the funding and the resourcing to make this happen. Because we could go so far in terms of joining up and better working, but it's going to come down to that, and that is going to be the challenge. And I've shared that with you before, and I will be continue to sort of share that in any meaningful work that's going on around this. Because without that, I think the impact will be, but it will not be sufficient to make that breakthrough. Any other comments, questions? Good luck. It's an ambitious, looks good on paper, but I think execution is going to be the challenge. And I hope it works, but I think as you said, there's a lot of work still to be done. And you're just sharing your initial ideas and thoughts at this stage. Thank you for doing that. Okay. Moving on to the next item then. Highway maintenance progress on the £9 million investment. Somebody got
Okay, thank you, Chair. For those who don't know me, I'm Steve Danby, Highway Asset Team Leader, working in the highway and street pied area. So I'm here to present the report. So if we could move on to the first slide then, please, Dom. This is the key slide that I will take a little bit of time on, and forgive me if I read from my notes, because this is the key message. Basically, as asset managers, it's key that we manage our assets and programmes and resources effectively. Our approach has been and continues and will continue to be developed. We've applied many asset management processes and principles, all in accordance with nationally accepted practices and in line with peers at other local authorities. So what we're doing is across the board. We're not sailing a ship on our own. In order to understand the need for maintenance, we need to consider the overall condition of our assets. This is achieved by carrying out surveys where the condition of all our assets is noted. Surveys determine what maintenance is needed and when. Based on the surveys, we can calculate an overall need for maintenance works out there. So how much money do we need to bring our assets to a manageable condition, and what is the annual depreciation value if the assets are not treated? So based on figures, we can build forward programmes across a number of different treatments using the right treatment at the right time principle. And some of the figures there on the screen there. So current projections suggest there is a maintenance need for roads and footways of 64.1 million. So basically what that means is we would need to inject that amount of money now into the network to bring all the assets to a serviceable standard. The annual depreciation for roads and footways is £7 million. That figure represents the money we need to invest every year at current rates of depreciation to keep our assets at the steady state of repair. So next slide, please, Dom. So with this level and type of information, along with the report presented to Cabinet in 2019, it was this data and the robust asset management principles in place that resulted in an injection of £9 million to improve the city's roads and footway assets, to enhance the condition, reduce the depreciation and the overall maintenance need. Next slide, please. When delivering best value, large emphasis was placed on the delivery of resurfacing works with our own in-house teams, greater collaboration and coordination with other works promoters, both internally and externally. Typical example of the previous slide was a before, and this current slide after. Two different locations, unfortunately. So next slide, please. So as stated, our approach to asset management is systematic and logical, is based on accepted principles. We basically use the guidance that is on the screen there, the Well-Managed Highway Infrastructure Code of Practice. This outlines a number of different recommendations of which builds our approach to the asset management for highways. Next slide, please. It's key that all local authorities adopt this asset management approach because as part of it, we are asked to complete a questionnaire each year, which enables us to secure even further funding. An example of this question that's on the screen there is an example of the DFT's incentive fund. So if we've got sound asset management approaches embedded into our systems, the chances are we're going to get a greater settlement from DFT over and above our own LTP of funding. Next slide, please. So just a few examples of what we've developed over these last few years. We've developed a number of maintenance hierarchies and a resilient network, plus implemented a risk-based approach to inspections of the roads and footways, all combining to allow decisions to be made as to where available allocated budget is seen to be more cost effective. Next slide, please. One of the key areas we're developing further is the scheme identification and compiling of forward works programmes, using data from the annual engineers' inspections and highway officers' engineering knowledge and experience. A structured process to deem whether a scheme should be included in the in-year programme is followed. Outlined there, the stages that we follow to get a scheme to be considered. Following that process, we can make a decision as to whether we need to carry works out at that location and what the treatment is. All candidate schemes are assessed and, where appropriate, promoted to the in-year programme. So the next slide takes us to the in-year process, where we've got our schemes from the longer-term forward programme. We're now looking at the schemes that we would want to deliver in that year. So it's key to ensure that the theory that we've just outlined is put into practice. So to make sure that the treatments that we've suggested are actually carried out on the ground. Obviously then we repeat that each year to make sure that we're carrying out that buzz strap line that we'll trot out each time. It's the optimum treatment at the optimum time. Next slide, please. So by implementing these processes and a shift in emphasis on better delivery models, we've been able to increase the outputs by using our in-house teams more, and have delivered significantly larger programmes of work as a result. More importantly, we've been able to reduce the reactive maintenance needs. So some of the figures there, by implementing more works in-house, we've increased our productivity from 30,000 square metres a year to 60,000 square metres just by using our in-house process and our better delivery model. Since the beginning of 2020 to 2021, we've delivered £1.8 million worth of improvements. And we've seen a massive reduction in our reactive gang numbers because we're targeting works rather than reacting to incidents as they occur. Next slide, please. So just to recap, so in 2021, we've delivered £9 million worth of highway works. So far this year, we've delivered 4.1 million and continue to deliver our programme. So up to now, over the last year and a half, we've delivered 13.1 million pounds worth of highway works into the, improving our assets. Next slide, please. In addition, it's not just about highways, maintenance on roads and footways. We've done additional work in carrying out surveys of all our gullies, and what we've resulted, the work that we've done has resulted in taking us from 2 gully emptied vehicles to 1, because we can target routes rather than having to react on going from one location to another, and increase the number of gullies that we cleanse each day. Next slide, please. Colleagues in the arboricultural team have also carrying out additional surveys of all highway trees, assessing the asset condition and the value in order to protect those assets and maintained into the future. That's not an area that falls within my domain, but obviously sits within Street Pride, and it's something that is key to, it goes alongside the work that we do in highways, because without that work, we'd be working independently, but we need to understand what highway trees we've got out there, what impact they have on highway maintenance. One of the key issues, tree roots, for example. So that information that will be gathered will enable us to further develop our programmes. Next slide, please. So going forward, there's more we can do, a lot more. So we are invested in carrying out more detailed surveys of all our roads and footways. It allows us to continue to make the correct decisions and intervene with the right treatment at the right time. We're able to demonstrate why certain locations are selected over others, give examples of why we don't do work, not just why we do work. It'll give us much better forward programming information, so that we can talk to other asset owners and works promoters, try and work more collaboratively, understand where other people want to work in the network. We can work to develop longer-term forward programmes to ensure that our treatment strategies for each of our assets can be determined to make sure that the work we are doing is the right work. Next slide, please. Going forward, another area for development is protection of our assets. One of the key problems that we have to encounter is when other people want to come in and disrupt our assets. So third-party intervention by utility companies. We've got massive programme of work by City Fibre, other utilities such as gas, electric, etc. Every time they make an opening in our assets, that reduces the life of that asset. So we want to be looking at carrying out more inspections, capture those failings and ensure those assets are repaired by the utilities at their cost and not become a burden on ourselves, and ensure that those assets are protected for a longer time. Next slide, please. So just to give a bit of a recap on numbers, we've done 392 carriageway resurfacing schemes since the start of 2021. Next slide. 43 footway resurfacing schemes, and the next slide, 125 preventative treatments, so that's things like micro asphalt, surface dressing, etc. We want to do more of that. We've had issues with suppliers and our framework contractors, but we are looking to have a much bigger preventative treatment programme into next year, because that is what the surveys are telling us, so it is the right treatment at the right time. Next slide, please. So finally, we're all very proud of the work that we do in highways, and equally proud to highlight to you an achievement that we have recently been awarded Best Service Team for our in-house operations delivering highway maintenance works. It's especially important to us because this is a well-established and recognised national award and up against some really good other authorities. So we are extremely proud of that. And the final slide, just an example of colleagues, both office-based, but more pleasing for us is the frontline staff receiving and showing off their awards. And hopefully, going forward, we can present more slides of that nature. That's the completion of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Simon, do you want to add anything to that?
No, just a thank you to Steve for presenting that award. I think it shows that despite some of the challenges, I think that presentation clearly shows that despite some of the challenges every council's facing nationally around funding, we are continuing to make improvements and efficiencies where we can in the services. So just a thank you to Steve and the team for that presentation.
Thank you, Steve. Questions? Councillor Blackwell?
Just want to echo what you said. I think, well done, Steve. I think that award's well deserved. I mean, you can see in and around Derby the improvements. The traffic can be a bit of a nightmare, but you can't win them all. That's just the way it is. But no, we can see in and around Derby, and I drive around Derby on a daily basis, the improvements. They are working, well needed. And like I said, from my perspective, congratulate the team. I did mention it before the last meeting in September, that award, it was a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned, because we can all see the results in our city Derby, and well done and keep up the good work.
Councillor Pandy?
Thanks for the presentation. I saw the figure for the last year, 9 million, and then you said 2021, 22, around 4 million something. How much is left?
I'd have to find that answer out for you, because that 9 million is not the total amount of monies that we've got, because we have other settlements. We have talked about the incentive fund, so things like pothole fund, the incentive fund adds to the 9 million that was given to us. So on top of that, there may well be another £6 million, for example.
The question was in 2020-21, you showed a figure of 9 million, and for 2021-22, and it's still going on, you showed a figure of 4.4 million, something like that. So my question was, do you know how much is left to be allocated for the rest of the year?
I think, Steve, you said 13.1 million has been spent to date.
Yeah, that's right.
Councillor Pandy is saying, is there what's left to spend?
Yeah, okay.
Or is there anything left to spend?
I think there is. I mean, we can cascade the budget figures after the meeting, but I think the annual budget for highways was around 3.5 million. The 9 million was additional investment on top of that, and then there's the external funding we pull in. So I'd have to pull those figures together, and I'll get you the remaining budget for the rest of the year.
The question, I asked for the figure. All I wanted to know is that would there be more money available just like last year? So would there be more money similar to last year to invest in Derby?
I think just to finalise that, so we have an annual maintenance budget that we invest in for the capital programme. The 9 million was a one-off investment.
But I just want to go back to that slide 2, Steve. I think that's the most important slide in the whole of this. I echo everybody else's congratulations to the team for the work they've done and the impact they're making on the roads and getting the award. So well done. Thumbs up for you. But I think that slide, slide 2, can you put that up? I mean, that is the most important slide. I mean, thank you for bringing that, because I think that encapsulate what the problem is. The 9 million extra funding that's made available was great. It's made an impact. But the slide was talking about something like 40 odd million pounds worth of need, and it's being added onto by 6.5 million. I think you said 5 million for highways and 1 point something for footways. So we're all, and you've got it on 10.1 in your report. You do mention, and I think that's really important. The enormity of the task is this investment is one-off. Will return to normal £3.2 million on average. We might get more, might get less. That's not going to help us to maintain the progress and go forward. And inevitably, sorry to say, we'll probably start going backwards. So that's really the significant point. I think that's really important to understand what the enormity of the problem is. And it's always been like that for years and years. And we're always chasing, and you know, we're all councillors and we get people saying, what about this street or that street? Because there's never enough money to do, in the old days, 1 or 2 streets in your ward. So I think I would like to make a proposal that, I mean, that is the issue. There's no certainty that there's going to be more funding to the amounts that we talk about, 9 million. But I propose we make a recommendation to Cabinet to continue to lobby government, because central government is where the funding is going to come from, nowhere else, to lobby government, central government, to fund more capital maintenance than the normal 3.2 million we're expecting. And that this should be something that they take on board and do for Derby and for our residents and for our highways and footways. I would like to put that forward as a recommendation.
Can I second that, please, Chair?
Yeah. Would that be, you know, I think we do need support for you for the work that you've done. If you get the money and the resource, you get a lot done. And I think we need to support the Cabinet to say, let's see what we can do to go back to government to get more funding and not revert back to what I think the reports indicate we may do. We don't know yet, but this is the time to actually try to make a sort of a push to help deliver what we need for the people of Derby. Councillor Alston.
Yes, Chair, I absolutely agree. There's always an opportunity to ask for more money. I think that's definitely something we should do in recommending to the Cabinet. I think there's another question for me, and I don't know if this is if you can answer me this a bit more clearly, is obviously a £40.5 million maintenance need. Presumably, and I know that the roads are assessed quite frequently, and there's a way of assessing them, a machine that goes around and says which roads are the worst roads and prioritisation, if you like. And when we talk about the £40 million need, is that over a period of years? Because obviously we can see roads deteriorating. How long, how many years is this £40 million need for exactly?
Yeah, Chair, I can answer that question. That 40.5 million is at this moment in time. If we were to wave that magic wand across Derby and put every defect that we know about, put right, that's what that would cost now. But from the minute that that's done, the depreciation starts to kick in again. So it's not over. If we spent £40.5 million now, okay, you know, the depreciation is going to slow down, but it's still going to happen. So just to pick up on your point, we do survey all our higher maintenance hierarchies every year and our lower hierarchies. So our major hierarchies would be our main roads, for example. So that's done every year. The remaining hierarchies are done once every 4 years on a cyclical basis. It's done by engineers rather than a machine, so it is a visual inspection carried out by trained officers, and we get much better information as a result of that. It really is backing up what our highways inspectors and our engineers are telling us out on the network. And again, it allows us to target the worst, not the worst, but the optimum places to carry the works out. It is that difference between the 40.5 million and the 7 million. The annual depreciation is if we continue to spend that £7 million is just to get all the defects that we needed to treat now at a steady state. The 40.5 million is the magic wand that gets everything, all defects of any nature, all sorted here and now to an acceptable standard. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, that's really useful. I think the other question for me is, obviously you mentioned this magic wand and being able to do that. The capacity issue, even if we had a magic wand of £45 million, would we have the capacity to wave that magic wand?
£13 million have been spent.
Yeah, I think, you know, as Steve said, that was estimating the cost of bringing the entire network up to speed. I think it's a given that, you know, capacity-wise, we wouldn't be able to deal with the entire network in 1 year, so it would have to be a programme of works. Yeah, you're right.
To be a scheduled program. I mean, I think the reality is that is a big challenge, but it's going to stay the same or get worse if we don't get more funding than the normal 3.2 million per annum that we get. I mean, I think you need the minimum is about 7-8 million per year, which will help you to sort of catch up better than the losing ground on the 3.2 million. Would that?
Yeah, if I just come in, yeah, the 7 million is what the surveys are telling us that is what we need to basically tread water and just stay where we're at. So if we don't get the 7 million, our assets are depreciating.
I mean, if the members are supportive, I think we need to just articulate that in the recommendation and also refer this slide to sort of give the full picture, because that gives the picture of what the challenge is and what needs to be done, and then to give the cabinet member and the cabinet resolve to go to government to argue the case to get at least 7 million, because the 9 million one-off has been really helpful, made a difference, but if we revert back to 3.2, we're only going to go backwards. That would be a real shame. Would you be supportive of that? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that report.
Chair,
I think that's one of the most important.
Just wanted to clarify a point there. I keep saying 40.5 million. That is just for the roads. Obviously, it's 64.1 million for roads and footways. So just wanted to clarify that point. Sorry.
I get that because I can see, 40.5 is for the highways, 23.6 is for the footways, and then there's potholes everywhere, but you get a separate grant for that anyway. So don't fall into one of those. Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's been really helpful. Thank you for that report. That's one of the most informative, I think, reports we've had, I've seen anyway, in this board. Thank you. The next item is the work programme. Dominic, do you want to say anything about the work programme?
Just that we have one meeting left on the 24th of January. Sorry, we have one meeting left on the 24th of January next year. There's 8 items for that agenda, so we already have quite a lot on, but if members have any other items they'd like to be discussed, please let me or the chair know.
So the programme's there, but 22nd of January, we've got a full and long list of agenda items, so come in with your flasks, and Councillor Alston's going to bring the fish and chips. Okay, are we okay with the programme for next meeting? Thank you. Thanks for everybody's attendance.